Imagine the year 1584. England, under the formidable Queen Elizabeth I, is a rising power, but still playing catch-up to a mighty Spanish empire. Spain controls vast swaths of the Americas, its galleons laden with gold and silver. England, a Protestant nation, looks at Catholic Spain with a mix of envy and defiance. They need their own foothold, their own claim to the boundless riches and strategic advantages of the New World. And stepping onto this grand stage is a man whose name still echoes with romance and adventure, Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh, a dashing courtier, a poet, an explorer, a favorite of the Queen, receives a royal charter. His mission? To establish a permanent English colony in North America, to challenge Spanish dominance, to exploit new resources, and yes, perhaps to create a base from which to launch privateering raids against those very Spanish treasure ships. It was an audacious plan, fraught with peril, but brimming with the promise of glory. Now, Raleigh couldn't go himself. His duties at court kept him tethered to England. So he sent others. The first exploratory voyage in 1584, led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, returned with exhilarating news. They had sailed into the Outer Banks, a chain of barrier islands off the coast, a place of shifting sands, dense maritime forests, and bountiful waters. They encountered the Sikatan tribe, a people of the Algonquin language family, and initially relations were friendly. Barlow's report back to England painted a picture of a veritable Eden, fertile soil, abundant game, and a gentle, welcoming people. Raleigh, invigorated, was knighted, and the vast unexplored territory was christened Virginia, in honor of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. To cement these newfound connections, two Native Americans, Manteo, a Croatoan, and Wanchese, a Sikatan, even journeyed back to England with the explorers. Imagine their awe, their bewilderment, stepping into the bustling, complex world of Elizabethan London. This cultural exchange, however brief, hinted at a future of peaceful coexistence. Oh, how quickly that hope would fade. The first attempt, 1585 to 1586, a test of survival. The stage was set for the first serious attempt at colonization in 1585. A fleet of 7 ships commanded by Sir Richard Grenville set sail from Plymouth. On board were about 600 men, with a core group of 108 designated to remain and establish the colony under the governorship of Ralph Lane. They finally reached Roanoke Island in late June, a small marshy island nestled behind the outer barrier islands, not the easiest place to build a city, but defensible. They immediately began constructing a fort and rudimentary shelters. Among this first group were men of extraordinary talent and vision. Thomas Harriot, a brilliant scientist, linguist, and cartographer, who meticulously documented the local flora, fauna, and Native American societies, and John White, a skilled artist whose watercolor paintings provide us with an unparalleled glimpse into the lives of the Algonquin people and the landscape of early Virginia. These two men, through their detailed records and vivid illustrations, offer us some of our most precious insights into this lost world.
But the idyll was short-lived. Almost from the outset, tensions began to fray. Picture this, a small incident, seemingly minor, like the theft of a silver cup from the English. To the colonists, perhaps a grave offense. To the natives, perhaps a misunderstanding or a different concept of property. But Governor Lane's response was swift and brutal. He ordered the burning of an entire Akoskogog village. This act of disproportionate retribution shattered the fragile trust that had been painstakingly built. Then came the true adversaries, the unforgiving environment and sheer logistical nightmares. The colonists, accustomed to English farming methods, struggled to cultivate the unfamiliar soil. Provisions from England were slow to arrive or insufficient. Food shortages became a constant gnawing worry. And then there was the devastating drought. Modern tree ring analysis, a remarkable piece of scientific detective work, has shown that from 1587 to 1589, the region experienced one of the most severe droughts in 800 years. Imagine trying to grow crops, to find fresh water, when the very earth is parched and unyielding. As if that weren't enough, unfamiliar diseases began to take their toll. By the spring of 1586, relations with the local tribes, especially the Croatoan, under their chief, Pimisapin, had deteriorated into open hostility. Lane, driven by fear and suspicion, launched a preemptive strike, ambushing and assassinating Pimisapin on June 1st. This sealed the fate of the first colony. Just days later, a stroke of pure luck, or perhaps divine intervention, arrived in the form of Sir Francis Drake's fleet, returning from a successful campaign against Spanish colonies in the Caribbean. The colonists, starving, embattled, and demoralized, practically begged Drake to take them home. He obliged. The first English attempt at colonization had failed. Grenville later returned to Roanoke, finding it deserted, and left behind a small garrison of 15 men to maintain England's claim. Poor souls. They too would soon vanish, reportedly attacked and scattered by vengeful Native Americans. The civilian colony. 1587. Birth of a mystery. Despite the crushing failure, Raleigh was undeterred. The dream of Virginia persisted. On January 7, 1587, he chartered a new venture, a truly ambitious undertaking, the city of Raleigh. This was not to be a military outpost, but a civilian colony, composed of families, men, women, and children, intent on making a new life. The chosen governor was none other than John White, the artist from the first expedition, a man whose personal stake in this endeavor was immeasurable. His daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias, were among the settlers. Eleanor was pregnant. They set sail from England on May 8, 1587, their hopes high, their destination the more promising Chesapeake Bay, a site chosen for its deeper harbors and more fertile lands. But here where fate, or perhaps outright treachery, intervened. Upon their arrival at Roanoke on July 22nd, their pilot, a man named Simon Fernandez, a notoriously difficult character, refused to take them any further north. He insisted they disembark at Roanoke, citing bad weather and the lateness of the season. To this day, historians debate his motives. Was it genuine concern or a calculated act of sabotage, perhaps fueled by Raleigh's political enemies? Whatever the reason, the colonists were stranded on the site of the previous ill-fated settlement. The scene that greeted them was grim. The fort was dismantled, overgrown, and scattered human remains were found, stark evidence of the fate of Grenville's abandoned garrison. This was hardly the fresh start they had envisioned. Yet they pressed on with remarkable resilience. They repaired structures, started planting, and tried to rekindle relations with the local tribes. It was a cautious dance, full of trepidation. On August 18, 1587, a moment of profound hope broke through the gloom. Virginia Dare was born, John White's granddaughter, the first English child born in the Americas, a symbol of new beginnings, a testament to enduring courage. But the harsh realities quickly reasserted themselves. The harsh drought, remember, was gripping the land. Food shortages loomed large. The settlers, facing the onset of winter and dwindling supplies, knew they needed help. A painful decision was made. Someone had to return to England to gather more provisions and reinforcements. The colonists unanimously chose John White. Imagine the farewells, the agonizing goodbyes. White, undoubtedly torn between his duty as governor and his deep love for his daughter and granddaughter, left them with a vital instruction. If the colony moved before his return, they were to carve their new destination into a prominent tree or post, and, crucially, if they were in any distress or forced to move against their will, they were to carve a cross above the message. It was a lifeline, a desperate hope for a reunion.
White departed on August 27th, promising to return swiftly.
Ah, if only he could have. The 3-year delay, war and worry. John White's swift return was anything but. As fate would have it, just as he reached England, the geopolitical landscape was erupting. The Anglo-Spanish War escalated dramatically, culminating in the monumental threat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Every available English ship, every sailor, every ounce of national resource was mobilized for defense against the invasion. No ships could be spared for a distant colony. For 3 agonizing years, John White was trapped in England, watching helplessly as precious time slipped away. Each passing season brought renewed torment. Was his daughter alive? His granddaughter, Virginia? The entire colony, 100 souls and more, alone across the vast, tempestuous Atlantic, waiting, hoping, enduring. Meanwhile, Spanish scouts did indeed sail near Roanoke in 1588, finding the area abandoned, but missing any deeper clues. The English foothold, it seemed, was gone. The return and the cryptic clue, 1590. Finally, on August 18, 1590, exactly 3 years to the day after Virginia Dare's birth, John White, after an arduous journey, stood once more on the shores of Roanoke Island. His heart must have been a drum in his chest, a mix of desperate hope and chilling dread. What would he find? As his landing party stepped ashore, a profound, eerie silence greeted them. The settlement was gone. Not destroyed, mind you, not burned to the ground, but the houses had been systematically dismantled. The area was overgrown, reclaimed by the wild. There were no sounds of human activity, no boats in the cove, no graves. It was as if everyone had simply vanished, packed up and left. But then he saw it. Carved into a prominent gatepost, clear and undeniable, was a single word, Croatoan, and on a nearby tree, a partial carving, CRO. And crucially, there was no cross carved above either message. This was the signal. This was the lifeline. This was the clue. Croatoan Island, today known as Hatteras Island, was the home of Mantio's friendly tribe, the Croatoan. The message seemed clear. They had relocated, in an orderly fashion, to their Native American allies. White was desperate. His family was there, just a day's sail away. He wanted nothing more than to follow, to find them, to embrace his daughter and hold his granddaughter. But the cruel fiend of fate intervened once more. A massive, violent storm blew in, threatening to destroy his ships and strand his crew. With heavy hearts and against every fiber of his being, his crew forced him to depart. He never made it to Croatoan Island. He never saw his family or any of the lost colonists again. And just like that, 115 souls, 90 men, 17 women, and 11 children evaporated from the historical record, giving birth to one of America's most enduring and haunting legends, the Lost Colony of Roanoke. What happened? Unraveling the theories. So the question that has echoed through centuries, what happened? For over 400 years, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and even amateur sleuths have grappled with this enigma. While no single universally accepted answer has emerged, the evidence, both historical and modern, points strongly towards a few compelling theories. Assimilation with the Croatoan Hatteras. This is by far the most widely accepted and archaeologically supported theory. Information 4. The Croatoan carving is the strongest direct clue. Later, in the early 1600s, Jamestown settlers reported encountering Native Americans with strikingly light eyes, and even some who spoke a smattering of English. More recently, extensive archaeological digs on Hatteras Island, the historical Croatoan, by groups like the Croatoan Archaeological Society, have unearthed a trove of mixed artifacts, European items like copper eyelets, slate writing fragments, and even rings, found alongside Native American pottery and tools, all in the same soil layers. This suggests not a fleeting interaction, but a long-term encampment where Europeans and natives lived together and worked. Some Lumbee Native Americans in North Carolina even claim descent from the Roanoke colonists, though DNA evidence is still inconclusive. Why it makes sense. Faced with starvation, disease, and hostile tribes, a small group of English settlers would have been entirely dependent on local knowledge for survival. Assimilating with a friendly tribe like the Croatoan would have offered food, shelter, protection, and knowledge of the land. Split and inland relocation. It's possible that the colony didn't all go to one place. The sheer desperation caused by the drought might have forced them to split into smaller, more manageable groups to increase their chances of survival. Evidence 4. John White's own maps, when analyzed with modern technology, show a small patch of paper covering a symbol for a fort or settlement further inland, perhaps near the Albemarle Sound. The first colony foundation's excavations at various sites in Bertie County, further inland, sometimes called sites X and Y, have yielded promising results, including fragments of Elizabethan ceramics like a lead pencil, suggesting small satellite groups of Europeans were indeed living there. Native oral histories also speak of Europeans living further inland. Why it makes sense. A single large group would have quickly depleted resources. Smaller groups integrating with different native communities might have had a better chance. Famine, disease, or environmental disaster. The brutal drought was an undeniable factor. It's plausible that many succumbed to starvation or unfamiliar illnesses. Why it makes sense. We know the drought was severe. English colonists were ill-equipped for survival in the American wilderness without native assistance. Evidence against. The orderly dismantling of the fort and the lack of mass graves or signs of widespread destruction at the Roanoke site suggest a planned departure, not a sudden catastrophic die-off. Massacre by hostile tribes. This was a popular theory in the 17th century, often fueled by competing colonial interests. Evidence 4. Powhatan, the powerful chief of the Powhatan Confederacy, the group that interacted with Jamestown, reportedly confessed to John Smith in 1607-1608 that he had ordered the killing of the Roanoke colonists. Evidence against. Again, the lack of destruction at the Roanoke site is a strong counterargument. Furthermore, Powhatan's confession is often viewed with skepticism, potentially a strategic lie to deter further English incursions, or to consolidate his power by claiming the credit for eliminating a rival European group. Spanish attack. The Spanish were certainly aware of English colonization attempts and viewed them as a threat. Evidence against. While Spanish reconnaissance patrols did sail near Roanoke, no Spanish records corroborate an attack. The absence of destruction at the site also argues against a military assault.
Archaeological and modern investigations. The hunt continues. The search for answers has been relentless. Early efforts by Raleigh himself through other expeditions and the Jamestown colonists who heard tantalizing rumors of light-skinned people living among native tribes yielded little concrete proof. The 19th century saw the romanticization of the story, with novels and plays cementing the Lost Colony myth and Virginia Dare as an iconic, almost mythical figure. But it's the modern era that has truly revolutionized the search. Teams like the First Colony Foundation and the Croatoan Archaeological Society utilize cutting-edge technology, LIDAR, which is light detection and ranging, to map hidden features beneath the forest canopy, ground-penetrating radar to see what lies beneath the earth, and meticulous archaeological excavations. At Hatteras Island, thousands upon thousands of artifacts, a true treasure trove, have been uncovered. Imagine finding a small copper eyelet from an Elizabethan shoe, a shard of English pottery, or a piece of writing slate nestled among Algonquian spear points and cooking vessels. These aren't just objects, they are echoes of lives, hinting at a profound, extended interaction between two cultures. Further inland, at various sites in Bertie County, more intriguing finds have emerged. Elizabethan ceramic fragments, dating precisely to the Roanoke period, suggest that small groups of colonists may have moved deeper into the mainland, perhaps integrating with different native communities. And as recently as March 2024, digs at the Elizabethan Gardens on Roanoke Island itself have confirmed a pre-colonial Algonquian farmstead rich with pottery and even copper jewelry, further underscoring the deep history of indigenous English contact there. Scholars like Scott Dawson, a descendant of the Croatoan people, passionately argue that the colony was never lost at all, but simply integrated into his ancestor society. Other experts, like archaeologist Mark Horton, lean towards a scenario where the colonists split into smaller groups, each finding different fates. The environmental studies linking the devastating drought to the colony's failure emphasize how critical indigenous knowledge of the land would have been for survival. The enduring legacy. The Roanoke colony is more than just a historical whodunit. It has permeated the very fabric of American culture. It's inspired countless works of literature, from Paul Green's celebrated outdoor drama, The Lost Colony, performed annually on Roanoke Island since 1937, to episodes of popular TV series like American Horror Story. It embodies the human spirit of ambition, the fragility of early colonial ventures, and the complex, often tragic interactions between European newcomers and the indigenous people who had called this land home for millennia. Modern interpretations of the Roanoke story emphasize empathy not just for the vanished colonists, but for all the peoples involved. It forces us to confront the challenges of cross-cultural encounter, the devastating impact of environmental forces, and the enduring resilience of Native American communities. The mystery remains, a whisper carried on the winds off the Outer Banks. It reminds us that history is not always a neat, resolved narrative. Sometimes it leaves us with tantalizing clues, endless questions, and the profound realization that some stories, even after centuries, continue to captivate, to challenge, and to remind us of the immense unknowns that still lie hidden in the past.
Now, when you hear prohibition, what comes to mind? Speakeasies, flapper dresses, untouchable G-men, and of course, the infamous Al Capone. Well, you're on the right track, because this period, roughly from 1920 to 1933, was a wild, contradictory, and profoundly transformative time in America. It was an era born of idealism, meant to clean up society, but it inadvertently birthed a criminal empire that reshaped cities and fueled a cultural revolution. Imagine the turn of the 20th century. America is undergoing massive change. Industrialization, urbanization, waves of immigration. With these changes came a host of social problems, or perceived social problems, including widespread alcoholism. The temperance movement, primarily driven by religious groups and women's organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League, gained immense power. Their argument was compelling to many. Alcohol was the root of all evil. It destroyed families, fueled poverty, led to crime, and corrupted politics. They envisioned a purer, more moral America, free from the scourge of drink. Their decades-long crusade finally succeeded with the ratification of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution in 1919.
It didn't just regulate alcohol, it outright banned its production, sale, and transportation. This wasn't some local ordinance. This was a constitutional amendment, the law of the land, meant to usher in a new era of national sobriety. The Volstead Act, passed by Congress, then provided the enforcement mechanisms. On January 17, 1920, Prohibition officially began. Many hailed it as a great victory. They believed saloons would disappear, crime rates would plummet, and a new dawn of morality would break. But oh, how wrong they were. The unintended consequences, the rise of organized crime. Human nature, it turns out, is a tricky thing. While Prohibition aimed to eliminate alcohol, it instead created an unprecedented demand for it. And where there's demand, there will always be supply, legal or not. This massive, nationwide market for illegal alcohol became the ultimate incubator for organized crime. Before Prohibition, criminal gangs existed, sure, but they were often localized, focused on petty rackets, gambling, or prostitution. Prohibition changed everything. Suddenly, alcohol, a commodity everyone wanted, became a black market gold mine. The profits were astronomical. This wasn't just about selling a few bottles. This was about establishing vast, complex networks of production, distribution, and protection. Enter the bootleggers. These were the individuals and gangs who smuggled liquor from Canada and Mexico, diverted industrial alcohol for illicit consumption, or set up clandestine distilleries, moonshine stills, often deep in the woods or hidden in urban basements. They developed sophisticated systems to transport their goods: fast cars, hidden compartments, bribed officials, and intricate routes. With enormous profits came the need to protect those profits, and that meant eliminating competition. This is where the era of the notorious gangster truly exploded. Iconic figures and violent rivalries. No figure embodies the Prohibition-era gangster more than Al Capone. Born in Brooklyn to Italian immigrant parents, Capone moved to Chicago and quickly rose through the ranks of the criminal underworld. He wasn't just a thug, he was a shrewd businessman, ruthless and charismatic. His empire stretched across Chicago, controlling an estimated 10,000 speakeasies, breweries, distilleries, gambling dens, and brothels. He essentially ran the city, bringing in an estimated $100 million a year, that's billions in today's money, from his illicit enterprises. Capone's reign was marked by brutal turf wars. Rival gangs fighting for control of lucrative territories engaged in unprecedented levels of violence. The machine gun became a terrifying symbol of the era. Drive-by shootings, bombings, and public assassinations became disturbingly common. The most infamous example, of course, is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. 7 members of Bugs Moran's rival Northside gang were gunned down in a garage, reportedly by Capone's men disguised as police officers. It was a shocking display of brutality that horrified the nation and solidified Capone's image as the ruthless king of the underworld. But Capone wasn't the only player. Other notorious figures emerged. Bugs Moran of Chicago, Capone's bitter rival. Lucky Luciano in New York, who revolutionized the mafia, moving it from old-school mustache Pete's to a more modern corporate structure, eventually forming the Commission to avoid constant internal warfare. Dutch Schultz in New York, a brutal figure who controlled beer and gambling rackets in the Bronx. George Machine Gun Kelly, famous for kidnapping and bank robberies, often operating in the South and Midwest. These gangsters were often portrayed in the media as larger-than-life figures, sometimes even glamorous. Their stories, filled with violence, power, and illicit wealth, captivated the public. The law's response? The untouchables. Against this tide of organized crime, law enforcement struggled. Many local police forces were overwhelmed, outgunned, or, tragically, corrupted by the vast sums of money flowing from illegal alcohol. Bribery was rampant, reaching into every level of government and law enforcement. But there were those who fought back. Federal agents, particularly those from the Bureau of Prohibition, tried to stem the tide. The most famous of these was Eliot Ness, who led a special squad of incorruptible agents in Chicago. They became known as the Untouchables because they refused to be bought or intimidated by Capone. While Eliot and his team successfully raided many of Capone's breweries and distilleries, cutting into his profits, it was ultimately tax evasion charges pursued by the Treasury Department that brought Capone down in 1931. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, primarily Alcatraz.
The speakeasy culture and changing morals. Beyond the violence, Prohibition fundamentally changed American social life. Instead of eliminating drinking, it drove it underground. Thousands of speakeasies sprang up in every city, hidden bars, often disguised as legitimate businesses where people could drink, socialize, and dance. To get in, you'd often need a secret knock or whispered password. This clandestine culture had a profound effect on gender roles and social norms. For the first time, women openly frequented bars. The era of the flapper emerged. Women who challenged traditional expectations, cutting their hair short, wearing shorter skirts, listening to jazz, and openly smoking and drinking. This era was a rebellion against Victorian morality, and Prohibition, ironically, provided a fertile ground for that rebellion. Jazz music thrived in speakeasies, providing the soundtrack to this exciting, dangerous, and defiant period. The end of the noble experiment, as it was called, was widely seen as a failure. It hadn't eliminated drinking, it had just made it illegal and dangerous. It had fueled the rise of powerful, violent criminal organizations. It had led to widespread corruption. And with the economic hardship of the Depression, the government realized it was missing out on enormous tax revenue from legal alcohol sales. The movement to repeal the 18th Amendment gained momentum. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified, officially repealing Prohibition. It was a momentous occasion, sparking celebrations across the country. The lasting legacy. Prohibition was a fascinating and tumultuous chapter in American history. While it ended, its legacy continues to shape our world. Organized crime. The structures and networks of organized crime, particularly the mafia, that was solidified during Prohibition, continued to thrive for decades, simply diversifying into other illegal activities like gambling, drugs, and racketeering. Law enforcement. The federal government's role in combating organized crime expanded dramatically, setting precedents for agencies like the FBI. Social and cultural shifts. The loosening of social norms, the rise of the flapper, the popularity of jazz music, many of these trends had roots or were significantly amplified during Prohibition. The power of unintended consequences. Prohibition stands as a stark historical lesson in the challenges of legislating morality and the powerful unintended consequences that can arise from such attempts. It was an era of paradox, an attempt to create a morally pure society that instead spawned unprecedented criminality and cultural rebellion. It's a story of ambition, corruption, violence, and defiance, a period that still resonates with an almost cinematic drama. And that, my friends, is the captivating, chaotic, and utterly unforgettable story of Prohibition and the rise of gangsters.